Hello and Happy New Year, heart friends and fellow students of the Great Mystery. I'm Lily Rose, and today I'm here with my teacher, colleague, and great friend, Santos, and we've pulled together quite a presentation for you guys this morning, and we're going to talk about the rise of Christianity and the deception of the Romans in a nutshell. But we're going to start by introducing that material by laying some groundwork for it.
Nice.
All right. So the first thing I want to ask you is, all right, when Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that God is dead, who do you suppose, or what do you suppose, that he understood to be the usurper of God's throne?
Yeah, that's a big question. God's throne. I think the humanitarian. Humanism.
Humanism.
Humanism was sweeping through the West, and so the philosophical, intellectual focus on man being first rather than transcendental mind of the universe was becoming very, very prominent. And I think people felt that this was going to overtake the traditional understanding of how God was perceived. But it's highly likely that Nietzsche was trying to rid himself and his readers of the stale, old, distorted view of viewing God as being separate from us, and not part of man's modern evolution and into technology and thinking for themselves and auto-determinism and things like that. So there's a kind of a convoluted, I see it as a very, very convoluted way of trying to break free from that Nietzsche was trying to help the readers to do. But I think he understood that we are God, and that we will always be God and different.
And so I was wondering, so like, would you agree that at this point in history, when Nietzsche was writing, which was 1954, that the scientific enlightenment was a serious contender to the throne in the minds of educated people?
1954?
That's when he published it, right? Is that right?
18? Isn't it?
Maybe. I looked at my copy. Okay, is it 18?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, apologies. Apologies. So do you think that, though, that it was like that was actually growing to be like the people, like educated people were really thinking that way and kind of more scientific reductionist in their thinking and the way that they were like kind of the trajectory and aim of their scholastic studies, their research and these sorts of things, was that really in vogue among people?
Yeah, industrialization of the world, technology coming to the point where it was saturating the culture, and people putting a lot of focus on scientific development, etc. And great advancements in human thinking. We had a lot of Newtonian materialist way of thinking.
Okay.
Where, and then we also had Darwin with his evolutionary model. There were a lot of conflicting, convoluted. Yeah, so Nietzsche was kind of writing in that era. So God is dead is more sort of a reference, I think, to the fact that the old way of seeing God that was very, very corporatized by Rome.
Well, right, yes.
Is that that part of God is dead, where now people are becoming gods, because he was freeing.
Well, right. No, I mean, I think that's what Nietzsche was ultimately going for, but I don't know that everyone who reads Nietzsche really, like, understands all of that. Like, I do see them being used as, like, an evidence for science, or at least people that haven't read it, but just have heard the phrase, you know, are thinking, you know, and along this way, and that maybe that science had replaced God. Like as holding the throne of what we consider to be like the, you know, the testimony for our way of knowing what we know, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. And so in religious studies, we recognize that there's an ongoing battle between science and religion, right? Like that's a big deal. And it was at this point here when science was kind of like the clear champion. Like he was kind of being really heavy, right? Kind of weighing heavy and being the heavyweight champion here at this time. And especially among scholars and philosophers and academics. But there were two scientists that came along the scene that started bringing in the psyche, dreams, synchronicity, and the realm of the subconscious. So that was kind of starting to bring in the soul nature through scientific lens, so that we could begin to use this information, you know, have epistemological validity again. And they discovered a science. And so do you know which two scientists that I'm talking about?
In the late 1800s?
Right, that started coming along the scene of science and bringing back in the numinous, bringing back in the soul level and the psyche and dreams and subconscious information. Jung
would be one.
Definitely.
Okay. Are you thinking of Freud?
I'm thinking of Freud and Jung, because they discovered started bringing psychology back, right?
Yes.
And so that's how we started getting back into this stuff, that knowing things that weren't just there, you know, could be measurable. It was science. It was like Carl Jung who really started bringing it back in, and so then it could become a valid way of knowing again.
Yes.
Okay, in our scientific way. And so, do you know that when Carl Jung was writing the Red Book, you know, do you know kind of like what he was starting to really dabble in and like what he was getting really interested in? He got really out there in that period when he wrote the Red Book.
Astrology.
Oh yeah, astrology, right? And so the thing is, the point I'm trying to make is that right now we're starting to see a real renaissance in astrology as a science. And that people are beginning to actually go beyond sun sign horoscopes and little quips in the newspaper, and to actually get into birth charts and transits and progressions. And there's this new sort of form of astrology. I don't know if it's new, but this is from my student perspective. I think it's kind of new. A way of looking kind of like, it's like a combination between mundane and orrery, where the astrologer is looking at these charts and sort of reading the energies for the moment, almost like an orrery chart for the fractal, and calling the energies of the collective consciousness. And it may have been invented by one of your students, David Lawrence Palmer, the Leo King, because that's the first person I really saw doing that, but that doesn't, this is just from my vantage. But like this kind of way of calling, you know, the energies of the moment and giving a forecast, an astrological forecast that applies to the collective. And so my question, though, has to do with, like, as a student, you've encouraged me to read books like such as the translations by Benjamin Dykes. He's got like Abu Mashar, and I've got some of the books here, the translations of Bonatti, Firmicus Maternus, William Lilly, you know, some of these classical astrologers. And my question to you would be, how do you perceive like what they're teaching and the way that they're doing astrology? How do you perceive what we're doing to be a little bit different? Or, you know, like, in what ways is it different?
Well, I would say it's like in any language, there are many registers. So in English, for instance, you have the legal register, you have the media register, and so they are sets of words that are used commonly and predominantly within those fields, but it's still English. Another way of looking at it would be music has many genres, and then there's break-off genres, and then there's fusions and things like that. It's always going to be astrology.
Okay.
Whether you're doing sidereal or tropical or Hori or questions, elective, mundane, they're all branches of astrology. Now, this is where a lot of schisms and breakaway thinking and schools come to be, and arguments between schools. For instance, the big one, tropical and sidereal, where people from one camp will vehemently denounce and criticise the other school, rather than looking to see how you can validate other systems.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, to me, it's tantamount to being, say, a blues musician and hating on all the other genres because they're inferior to blues and not enjoying them ever. It has to be blues, right? I've always been syncretic since I was young, multilingual. I've never subscribed to one way of playing my music. My music, which I did professionally for many years, has been fusion, and it's always been a fusion. It's a bit of jazz, a bit of flamenco, a bit of Latin, and you just mix it all up like an Italian minestrone, and you just put all the vegetables in and it comes out great. So all of these things are beautiful. I often go to sidereal Jyotish astrology for things which tropical won't give me the answer.
Okay.
So I'm always going to all the different branches of astrology and looking into them and seeing the validity in them. So some of these new techniques, you mentioned a new way of doing predictive astrology and things like that. There's nothing new under the sun.
Okay, right.
There really isn't. And I love seeing all of these new things and new ways of doing things, because everyone is going to bring their perspective and insights from past lives and their knowledge base into astrology. So everybody's valuable.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah. And everybody's going to be putting a little bit of the jigsaw puzzle together. So Lily and Firmicus Maternus, guys that I really, really love, Bonatti, all of these old guys, they seem to have a more insightful way of looking at astrology. They had knowledge which we don't have anymore for some reason. Mm-hmm. And I like their style because it was very syncretic. And because I'm a student of theology, and I love theology, my astrology is very theological. Mm-hmm. I can't help but see those 7 planets as the 7 gods, the cosmocrators of this creation. And they all have their specific individuated frequency, and those are the different kinds of electricity. Mm-hmm. So I believe that there are 7 kinds of electricity. Okay. Sri Yukteswar, in his book The Holy Science, he says there are 5, according to Hindu wisdom, and that they correspond to the 5 senses. But there's always 2 that are kind of not so clearly visible and clearly seen. Like the 7 planets, 2 are luminaries, and then the others are what they call planets, wandering stars, i.e. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus and Mercury, whereas the Sun and the Moon, being the luminaries, they seem to be the sort of the separate ones. So, and Manly P. Hall speaks about this too. We have 5 senses, but really we have 7. There's 5 this, but really there are 7 to complete the whole set. So, with respect to Sri Yukteswar, yes, there are definitely 5 electricities, and they do correspond to the senses. So in other words, he's saying one kind of electricity is very much the visual, another one is the audio type of electricity, and the other ones are for all the other senses. So the 2 that we don't include generally, they would be more transcendental, which, as Manly P. Hall puts it, those 2 are the ones that once we come into the higher mind and embrace them and are able to capture their frequencies through higher consciousness, then everything becomes a septenary, a sevenfold. So I believe there are 7 electricities. There's one magnetism, the source, white light, and then as that white light is projected into a prism, and then the refracted 7 colours on the outside, those are all 7 electricities. So the indigo and violet, they would be the ones that are sort of more outside of the red shift, blue shift part of the rainbow, so of the rainbow colours. So they are more the 5 that we relate to mostly, the 5 senses, the sensual world, etc. But the other 2 are also there. So why I'm saying this is that there are 7 electricities and 7 specific frequencies to creation. And those are, in astrology, those are the 7 visible planets.
Okay.
So that's the way I see astrology. I see it as the electrical influences coming through those cosmocrators, those mediators, because what they do is they mediate from the 12 signs. Wherever they find themselves in those signs, they will channel the frequency from that sign, which is a passive energy, through their active agency and into our theatre, the earth.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah. So there's many ways of, let's say, interpreting or understanding astrology, right? So, yeah. And
right. I think they all work, and I agree. Like, there's a reason why we're doing, and why the things that we're doing now that are popular, and we're doing it. But I think what I was kind of leading at is that that we're seeing the soul come back into science, and astrology coming in back to science through transpersonal psychology a lot, and that because of that, our modern astrology has a little bit of a transpersonal psychology bend. Just a little bit, that wasn't as apparent in classical antiquities of astrology, like classical astrology, that we see in, Firmicus Maternus. And for me, when I started studying these books, I didn't really understand, like, I didn't have the context for understanding why they needed such a fine sieve, for these energies. Like, there are different shadow points on the chart. There are, is it Occidental, is it Oriental, all these terms, and really a lot of technical jargon. It's very rigorous study. And until I really had the context of orary or elections and predictive work, like, I didn't really understand, like, why. I mean, I understand why we would still need it, but like not as much, right? So I think the context for that is really helpful. And just to notice that we sort of, are coming at our astrology now sort of from a more transpersonal psychology thing. But there is, there are other ways of looking at astrology. But I do agree that everyone's doing great. Like, everyone's giving a good, offering of their heart energy, right? It's all helpful.
For sure.
That's like the Tibetans reveal Terma, right? Like, in their religion, they have this thing where, like, there will be Tertons who reveal, like, these mind treasures, and then they're able to update their teachings that way, right? So we're sort of revealing, like, Terma as we go too, in astrology,
yes.
Right? So let's see. Okay, so I was going to, because I've been studying this, and I noticed that when I'm reading these books, that they're very difficult, okay? And so I've sent you some questions being like, I don't understand, and you sent me your graphics, like I've looked at your graphics, and I've just noticed how it's a lot harder than you would imagine to take this book and get this graphic out of it, right? So I'm just like celebrating the mastery of like that you've like syncretized and synthesized this knowledge in this way, and that it shows that you've obviously already gone through all of these studies and done all this work to like a mastery kind of level, because I'm not seeing that chart when I'm like the graphic when I'm reading the text. Like, it's difficult, right? It's not an easy study. And so I was just kind of bringing up, the fact, because I'm not sure everyone's even familiar with horary astrology or familiar with some of these terms and etc. So I was going to ask you some questions about like how to do deacons and so how these things are working. But I decided to pull an horary chart for today to kind of, because it's New Year's Day and we're kind of in this astrological window that's really intense, right? Like we're in between two eclipses. We've got Saturn and Pluto tightening to that really, I mean, this is a big moment.
It is very, very.
And today, I'll go ahead and grab the horary chart because today we actually have Mars probably right now is applying to the critical degrees in Scorpio. So he is revealing hidden information regarding to structures, corrupt structures in Capricorn, right? Because we know that when Saturn and Pluto make a conjunction, that it's either going to annihilate boundaries or people are going to really rigidify their, like how they see it, their Pluto, So there's a lot going up. So anyway, I decided I would pull an horary chart for the moment and ask the question, if we're about the business of revealing truth today, will our message be favorably received? Okay, and now I am not a professional or astrologer yet. Like I'm just getting into this. So this is a very simple horary reading. But basically what you do is you take the question. So if we're about the business of revealing truth. So Santos and I today are about business. So that would be the third house, okay? So we see the third house here is in Taurus. And we make this the first house because this is us. This is our person. And then we want to know about revealing truth, which would be an 8th house matter. So it's called derivative houses, and you count 8 houses from the third, using the third as the first. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we see that the 8th house, the cusp is made in Scorpio, and Mars is in residence. Mars is the ruler of Scorpio, okay? So we see Mars is in residence, so this is 8th house derivative, Scorpio ruled by Mars, and Mars is in residence. So the final part of the question is, would our message be favorably received? And so that would be a 10th house matter. It's like public reputation, how people are seeing what you're putting out there. And so the derivative house of that would be Capricorn, and Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and in residence. So then what you do, I mean, this is why you need all these teams, because it doesn't always show up as obvious as this. We're the rulers in the house and like, yes, here I am. And so you look for a Ptolemaic aspect between the two planets. If it's like a benefic aspect, the answer is yes. If it's a hard aspect or a malefic aspect, the answer is no. And so we can see that Saturn and Mars are in a loose sextile. It's a 7-degree orb, and that's fine for horary. Now, if Mars had gone ahead and moved into Sagittarius, we couldn't do this chart. But because he's still in Scorpio, the answer is clearly yes. So if we're about the business of revealing truth today, our message will be favorably received. And so because of this, I thought rather than ask you advanced astrology questions, which we might get into at a later point, that I would ask you today about a really big truth that's been kind of revealing itself to me, and that you've had a hand in helping me to kind of reveal as Mars has been in Scorpio this season. And it's very much about revealing secrets that are foundational in these corroded systems that are governing our world. And so I'll move this out of the way. So,
hang on, leave it there.
Okay, because I thought you might want to draw. But let me get my notes because I want to make sure that I organize it well, because we want to lay the groundwork, because we don't want it to be confusing, because this is actually it's kind of a trigger topic that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And we don't want to hurt we want people to clearly understand where we're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about was in this conversation was the ancient culture of Sumeria. And we talked a little bit for a second, and I know that you're familiar, that in 1847 there was an archaeological dig, and we recovered the library at, do you remember how to say it?
Ashurbanipal.
Ashurbanipal.
That was the king.
Yes, okay. And he was an interesting king, because he was very interested. He was a good military commander, and he was not necessarily the nicest guy, but he sent scribes out to collect texts, okay? And he was very interested in occult material, astrological material, and mythology. So the library that they found there was a real gem. Now they found 2 libraries, and some of them had historical records, financial records, and they kind of mixed them all up, because we didn't know what we were doing at this time. Nobody could really read cuneiform, and there were just loads of tablets. And what's really interesting about it is that it was an attempt to destroy this information and level the palace. But because they were written on clay in cuneiform, what they actually did was fire it like in a kiln, and it was all preserved under the ground, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so this library tells us about a great king named Sargon the Great, right? And it tells us about his 2 children. So, and I know you know a lot about this, so I was going to let you maybe take it over for a bit and just, talk a little bit about what you know about Sargon the Great and his 2 children, Naram Sin and Edhuana.
Yeah, it's always the 2 children,
No, right.
So you can see a very mythological motif there of a great king, 2 children. The wife comes in as well, Nimrod, Semiramis. It's always the same model. It never ever changes. Just a few different variables, but the ingredients are always the same. 2 sons like Enlil and Enki, and one is a good one, one's not so good. Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau. It's the same stuff. And then you mentioned before the Enuma Elish and the Gilgamesh epic, the flood, etc. All of these, they always turn up. They always turn up. So regardless of whether Sargon was historical and ruled 4,500 years ago, as they say, it's pointless even endeavouring to think of it in that way, because Sargon it's a title. It's like Pharaoh. There's no one Pharaoh. It's a king, a title, So, and it's the same with other kings. So it's more of a title than anything like that. Like Nebuchadnezzar as well. Nebo is Mercury, so Nebuchadnezzar is again a ruler on earth which always has the name of either the sun or Mercury or Saturn in it.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
Yes.
Well, from what I see, Sargon was like the first great king that we really have that we have stories about, right? And so we know a little bit about his father and his grandpa, but there are no stories about that, right? So the mythology starts with Sargon the Great. And what's interesting about him is that his mother was a changeling and a devotee to Iana. She was a high priestess, and that means she was probably more like a Naga or a Dakini of some sort. And she could not, of course, raise this child because she's a priestess. And so she put the baby in a basket, in a reed flute, and laid him in the water. This is a very familiar story to the story of Moses, right? And so we didn't find this till 1847, right? So, and then it took longer to get translated, but it's interesting. And so, so Sargon he called himself like the priest of, he was the king of Acadia, of Akkad. Is it called Akkad?
Akkad.
Yeah. So he's the king of Akkad, which was a great empire in Sumer, okay? And he considered himself to be. So Sargon was a great king and a devotee to Iana. He called himself the anointed priest of Anu and the great Insi of Enlil. Sargon partnered with Iana and the host of the Sumerian deities in his rule. He consulted the gods and followed their direction. And assumably, he consulted the gods via a method of astrology that was used in Sumer at the time, that worked mostly with the sun, the moon, and Venus, because they were all very visible planets or luminaries. So, but although Sargon was a great king and partnered with the divine in his rule, and he was considered to be one of the great kings of Sumeria, his son, Naram Sin, was very different. So Sargon had 2 children. He had a daughter named Edhuana, and his daughter was installed or put in as a priestess to Nana in the major temple in the city of Ur. And she is known to be one of the first poets that we have on record. But her brother Naram Sin decided to go rogue on the throne. So rather than partnering with Iona, he instead expelled his sister from the temple and kicked her out, right? And he declared himself to be God of Akkad. He was the king of the four quarters, king of the universe. And no longer would the crown, the crown of Sumer, partner with the divine, because now the king was claiming to be divine himself. Okay, so this is the first story that we have on record of a king doing this, and it resulted in what is called the curse of Akkad, and it's where the gods withdrew their support shortly after that, and the kingdom of Sumeria fell. Okay, but we see Gilgamesh, and he's the kind of king. It's such a sad story, and he decides he and his good big old beefy friend, like they're big bodied, they're that kind of king. They're the kind that's going to beat you up to get their power, right? And they kill Humbaba, the protector of the forest, and they throw a hindquarter at Iona. They say, we're not going to partner with you. We don't want to be with you. And then they build the Tower of Babylon up to the sky, trying to reach, the stars. They're trying to be gods. And Gilgamesh goes on that whole cycle, like trying to get immortality, because that's what the gods have that he doesn't.
Yep.
Anyway, so we see very clearly a rift in the mythology there, and it's present in the Enuma Elish as well. We didn't find this, though, till much later. Then, if we go over to Egypt, okay, we see the same thing. If we look at Atum, and then we have Osiris and Isis and Set, right? And you see the same dichotomy going on with a good philosophical king trying to rule in confluence with the heavens, and an evil brother, that kills Osiris and tries to take the throne. Okay, so we know that about Egypt. And then if we go over to Persia, we see the same dichotomy. We see the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness, and we could easily ascribe, the matriarchy and the patriarchy, not to be boy and girl, but just words, to one of each of those, okay? And then when we get to Greece, we see the Iliad, right? So that's a big story in Greece. And we see the Helen, the spirit and zeitgeist of Greece, which is the Sophia and the divine goddess and the wisdom, being shuffled around, fought over, and protected, like Achilles is the protector. And there's a real good confluence between Achilles and Isis because of the story of Achilles and his heel, right? And Isis does the same thing, dips a baby in the fire. So that's obviously her protector, right? So Achilles does not like Menelaus. He likes Helen, And so we see the same thing. And then even in Jason and the Argonauts and the Golden Fleece, okay? So where I'm leading with this is to say that, Plato is the writer that was the last one that we really know that had advantage of all of that ancient history. Okay, and Plato was writing he used Pythagoras, right? Like he was writing about sacred geometry. He was writing about the Republic, about how to create an enlightened society. Okay, and he was writing also about theurgy and about the Chaldean star lore. And he looked to a priest named Berosus, who, of course, we don't have his writings, but we have fragments. And Berosus was teaching about Oannes, the Atlantean ancestor that visited the righteous Mesopotamian kings. Did not visit Naram-Sin, visited Sargon, and gave him information that at the time of the flood was buried under the two pillars of Solomon. Apparently. This is the way the story goes. And it had to do with time cycles, planetary cycles, the precession of the equinox, very highly refined information that we marvel at how the Chaldeans knew this, right? Like, how did they calculate that? It's very curious. And so Plato was, talking about the fall of Atlantis and this Atlantean ancestor coming back and giving us this information. Had to do with sacred geometry, had to do with the Ienge, and this theurgistic process of reascending as a star, reascending to the stars, okay? So we know this about Plato, and Orphism becomes important. But then, curiously, we have Rome, okay? Rome enters the scene. We know from mythology that it was founded by two brothers who had no mother, no matriarchal connection. They were raised by a wolf. And wolves in the Norse tradition, too, it's like they put on their wolf suit to go do mischief and interact with the state. And so They were raised by wolves, and then they kill each other. One kills the other immediately. There's like, and then what they actually do is, in order to get their women, they hosted a game, and they closed the gates, and they invited their neighbors, the Sabines, and they closed the gates and killed the men and raped the women and took them as their wives. So this is how they got their women. So there's a very questionable question about the matriarchy here and how it's being treated in Rome. But the main question is, like, we have this like connected history, right, that we've uncovered now, and we look at the cultures and we're like, one of these things is not like the others. One of these things, and where did our books go? So we also know at the rise of the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar that Julius Caesar had the Aeneid commissioned by Virgil. Let's just add this part real quick and I'm going to let you take it away. So he commissioned the Virgil to write the Aeneid, where he has the ancestor of Troy, Paris, so that had the lineage of the divine matriarchy, like of the matriarchal tradition, because she was chosen by Aphrodite and given the apple, the apple thing. And so he was chosen. And so he took that tradition and brought it to Rome by artistic coercion, right? Like he planted this. And then he also had Aeneas visit the Phoenicians, the capital of the Sumerian culture, and kind of, check off that box that we're better than them, and, we're actually moving it over here to Italy and to Rome, okay? Mm-hmm. And so it's just very, and then we have Mark Antony partnering with Cleopatra and the Library of Alexandria being burnt, okay? So we checked off the Egyptians too, mm-hmm. So you see Rome, getting a hold on all of those other cultures, burning the material. And the question is, like, did we just not take care of our books? Like, no, like, there's always been people like me who love their books, right? They didn't just disappear. And as we found in 1847, these Sumerian texts, and we found Nag Hammadi, which are the Jewish Essene kind of texts, that show a very different version of the Messiah, the Messianic leader, than we see in the New Testament. And so the question becomes, Rome is looking very suspicious. And so I wrote you and said, wait, what was that you said about Jesus as Caesar? And so that's kind of, where this conversation, mm-hmm. This is kind of where your part of the conversation comes in.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a great summary. So many things to talk about there. I don't even know where to begin, but let's have a go.
Okay.
Rome. Let's start with Rome. See, in 1947, you mentioned a few discoveries, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, and did you mention there the Enuma Elish with the cuneiform library there in Sumer? Was that?
That's what I was
around the same time?
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Well,
yeah, big year. I don't see it as... those years, 48, 47, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered around the same time as well, and then in 48, the Nag Hammadi, the 11 parchment, or what do they call them, vellum books that had all these Gospels about Jesus, and the Therapeutae and the Essenes and all of this. So this ties in really, really well with what I'm teaching in syncretism, the Prisca Theologia, the perennial philosophy, in that all of these works, all of them, bar none, they are all timeless. Mm-hmm. They just get handed down and handed down and handed down. And as an empire takes over from another empire, they appropriate themselves of these timeless works, redact them, manipulate them to suit their empire. So now this Jesus, Saviour, God, King is now in Roman times.
Right.
Whereas the Egyptians had him thousands of years ago as Horus in their time.
Right.
And the Sumerians had him as Nimrod, and then Krishna in the Hindu, and everywhere you go, the same exact story to the very detail. Banam. is repeated and repeated and repeated over and over again. It is the perennial philosophy. It never changes. It never will. So when a new mythology comes along, like they're trying to do now, they're trying to, recreate and make another mythology to captivate people's minds in the consensus, herd mind, so that it can be manipulated again for another period of time. This is always what is going on. And when you see beyond the literalism of these works, and you see what's really going on, in that they are timeless and they've just been manipulated over and over again, then you will see the true story, the story of the ecliptic. And when you hear about Nimrod building a tower to reach the high heavens, well, that's you. You are Nimrod, and you are building your tower, which is your spinal column. You're going up the 33 vertebrae to get to the heavens, so there will not be a flood again, which will flood your body with acidity and destroy the world. And all the pagans in your body, who are the agents of acidity, which are trying to destroy the chrism to raise it up, your body of light. You see?
Yeah.
So, again, the builders of towers to reach the high heaven. You'll see this motif in Revelation. You'll see it in the book of Daniel. It's always the same story, and the story is in you. It's not out. Well, it is out there in history, but it's not departing from a historical point. History just repeats in that it's going to do that very thing which is described in the scriptures. It's just that's the way it works.
Right, that's beautiful.
So everybody is repeating this wheel in their lives. History is repeating this wheel in their lives. Everything comes from this. Everything. So it's like Russian roulette, this thing is turning. And as you throw in the die, it'll fall in. So here we've got Mars has fallen in this house, in this sign, right? So a wise one who understands astrology, he will understand what that means and what potentials can come from that. So, Jesus and his 12 disciples, Jason and his 12 voyages, Hercules and his 12 labours, King Arthur and his round table and his 12 knights. It's never going to be anything different to this. And thank you, Josephus, who said, wherever you see 12 in the Bible, whether it's the 12 precious stones on the breastplate of the high priest, the ephod, whether it's the 12 loaves of bread on the sacrifice table, whether it's the 12 copper bulls holding the holy sea at the entrance of the most holy, whatever 12 you see, know this, that it is the Mazzaroth, or what the Greeks call the zodiac. It is no different. Philo of Alexandria also taught us this. So, in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, you'll hear about the Essenes. Well, the Essenes, that's right. I like this. I want to read. This is really beautiful. Yeah, I've got some points I want to make here. Essa is Jesus. So the Essenes, well, they were just Jesus people. And they were around for thousands of years before the historical Jesus of the Romans, because that's all it is.
Right.
Any historical Jesus that we talk about today, it's a Roman contrived story. It has nothing to do with literal history at all. You will find Jesus in history, like you'll find Santa Claus in history. You go back 200 years, you'll find Santa Claus in history. But it doesn't mean Santa Claus, you can't reify Santa Claus because it's a mythology.
Right.
Same with Jesus. You see these Christians arguing, oh yes, but there's, hundreds of years ago there were Christians and Jesus and... Yeah, you'll find him in history, like you'll find clocks in history, you'll find other legends in history, but they're still only legends, right? Again, like the tower builders, that's you. You're building a tower to heaven because you start at the bottom, Buddha meditating under a tree. Well, Buddha means body.
Mm.
And so you are Buddha because you have a body,
Right.
right? And so the tree in which you sit under is the subtle body.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a tree. Around you there's a Torah, which is a Torii.
Mm-hmm.
That's the tree you sit under. And so when you sit there and you have your spinal column and you have your 7 chakras, this is making a tree. So your body is sitting under the tree and you become enlightened by sitting under this tree.
Mm-hmm.
So why are they speaking about Esa, which is how you say Jesus? You go to Lebanon today and they'll say Esa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Jesus. Well,
Oh, as
Jesus, you can see it there, it's still there. Eso. In Proto-Celtic, there's Jesus' name. In Ireland, thousands of years ago, Jesus.
mm-hmm.
Right? Jesus, Esa, Essenes. In Greek, it's Jesus. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So, he was there for thousands of years. And the Nag Hammadi Gospels really reveal that those Gospels were way, way older than the Roman Jesus.
Right.
You see? So, going back to the Romans, what they did was they just got all this, burned the libraries, destroyed the evidence of a timeless Jesus for their convenience,
Mm-hmm.
because Christianity was everywhere and the worship of Jesus. You can go to Japan. I stood on the grave of Isikiri. Isikiri, Jesus Christ, in Japan. I went to it, and there's this cross, and it's to Isikiri. It's one of three graves. One's in Jerusalem, of course,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ. Another one's in Kashmir somewhere. They've got this grave to
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ, and then there's this third one in Hedei, Japan, and Hedei is Hebrew. It's a derivation of Hebrew. So Isikiri, you see, what they did was they just poo-pooed all of this evidence
Mm-hmm.
that this Kiri, Chronos archetype has been around forever and everywhere, and just Romanized it and brought it right back to Rome, because now Rome wants to rule the world, because you've got to capture people's religious side, their spiritual side, if you want to politicize them and bring them into one unified political ideal where you can control them.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot do it. The Bolsheviks tried to destroy this in Russia,
Mm-hmm.
destroy God and Christianity from Russia. Well, go to Russia now and you'll see they're the most Christian, beautiful Christian country that you'll ever find. It didn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
It can't. It's in our DNA. Because this is...
irrational belief. I've heard, like, if you can get people to have something, like, so that they'll just act even if it's irrational, right? So you want something that's inspired like that to get to lead them, if they have something that they have that they'll act irrationally about, So climate change, I've heard the argument that climate change might be something like that in a scientific culture, but
Exactly.
I don't want to trigger
Good analogy.
but yeah.
Beautiful. That's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So you've already got all these masses of people who are spiritual, and in their DNA, this is the science that is in their DNA. You will never eradicate Christianity
Right.
from humanity, because it's one and the same. We are children of light.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the science of light when understood correctly. The
Right.
Bible, all of these books, they're such beautiful works, totally misunderstood. So what Rome did was, you'll find that their hero was not just a spiritual hero, but now their king, Julius Caesar, JC,
Mm-hmm.
becomes another earthly version of Jesus Christ. They are one and the same. Just check out the works of Francesco Carota. Francesco Carota. I think it's 2 R's, Carota. I know it's 2 T's. Is it right? Francesco?
It looks right. And if you go online, there's actually, he offers a PDF translation, English translation, that you can read, like his founding argument, most of it for free if you just Google him and go to his website.
Okay.
You don't even have to buy the book. I mean, if you need to, I wanted to read it right then, so it's helpful.
Yeah, I was looking into his works at least 10 years ago, I think. So I've been following this guy. Another guy is Joseph Atwell. The difference between Atwell, and they're both correct, both of these guys, are very, very good researchers, and they've uncovered what I just know, in syncretism, and I've been teaching all along. It's just, but the thing is, they've gone focused right into the specific details and uncovered. This guy here uncovered that JC, the Julio-Claudian line, is all based on their version of Christianity, and then it was redone again with the Flavians about 70, 80 years ago, and Vespasian. So Vespasian became God, and his son Titus, the destroyer of the temple in Jerusalem, became God's son and saviour, whereas Julius Caesar and Augustus became father and son, gods, and etc. And then a calendar was created in honor of them. Well, this is how it works. You see, they're both correct. Christianity can be traced back to this in one version, and it can also go back to this, and then it can also go back to a Julio-Claudian Flavian called Constantine 300 years later. And then you can go to Justinian 200 years. Justinian created another version, Justinian. And then you can go back to the Medicis 500 years ago, and where they actually put their own portraits in as Jesus. You'll find that there was a Medici, I forget which one it was, and maybe it was Michelangelo who painted him. And
was it Lorenzo?
I think it was Lorenzo.
I think it was Lorenzo.
Cosimo, whatever.
I can't help it. I still like the Medicis. I can't help it.
It's all the same family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those families, they're not evil, they're not bad, they're just families. Some of them were absolute thugs, and others were benefactors to mankind. It's just...
Well, the Medicis play up their story to be, patrons of the arts and, whatever, but we know, But you can't, the story, I like historical documentaries, I told you that, so I can't help it,
So whichever of these guys you study, you will find that they are correct. For instance, Carota, let's get rid of this now. And what I'll do is just write this down a bit so we can get a bit more in detail. So he pointed out that Julius Caesar gets betrayed by Brutus, Jesus Christ by Judas. This guy goes to a place called Capernaum. Jesus is famous for going to Capernaum, where he makes miracles. This guy crosses the Rubicon. This guy goes to the Jordan River. This guy gets crucified on the Ides of March. And I bet I spelt that wrong. Ides would be... doesn't matter for now anyway, which would be the 15th of March. Well, Jesus is also crucified on the Ides of March. Alright, here's one. AD. So supposedly, I had an argument with a Christian, born-again Christian, the other day, and he says, of course we know Jesus is historical. The calendar goes back to him. There you go. Oh wow, so that's it. That's evidence that he's historical, rather than looking deeper to find out what this Anno Domini means. Well, Anno Domini, AD. So supposedly we have a historical timeline, and this is the year 0 over here. This is BCE, before the Common Era. So we've got, say, 2,000 years ago over here we've got Abraham. 1,500 years ago we have Moses. 1,000 we have King David. Then 700 years ago, 700 years before year 0, we have the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Then the Hellenic period. Then we come down and the Romans start ruling around here about 100 years prior in the Punic Wars. They destroyed Carthage over here. So this is before the Common Era. CE is another way of making AD. Common Era, Anno Domini. But this is the one I want to focus on, because Anno Domini means the year of the Lord. And of course that's Jesus, isn't it? JC. Well, isn't it coincidental that we call the calendar the Julio-Gregorian calendar? It goes back to Julius Caesar. So whose calendar is it really? Well, it's JC's calendar. It is Julio Caesar's calendar. Absolutely it is. So it's easily to transfer that now to Jesus Christ.
And didn't they deify Caesar after his death? So they would call him Lord.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And he was the people's hero. You know, the public, what's the word when you have a...
benefactor.
Yeah, like a benefactor who's more for the common people. Yeah. So, and that's what Jesus was, wasn't he? He came to save the sinners and the common ones. He didn't care about kings and high, nobles and everything. He wanted to, touch the lepers and heal them and raise up the poor. So he was a common hero, right? Mm-hmm. Public. So you see all these analogies, it's all pointing to the same thing. Anno Domini is, it's the year of the Lord Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar, thank you, Carota, is Jesus Christ. Yeah. You see, so there's no escaping it. You can escape it if you wish to and be... some people like to not want to face the truth. They look at themselves in the mirror even and they don't want to face that they're getting wrinkly and old or whatever, and so they pile on the makeup or whatever and hide what's really going on. Mm-hmm. And that's what people are going to be doing with this.
Right.
No matter how many points and how many connections you make to prove this over and over again, they'll just deny it. Mm-hmm. They're not going to face it. You see, but syncretism brings you to face all of these obvious things. Mm-hmm. If it smells like, and it looks like, and it sounds like, and it feels like, then it probably is.
I really mourned this after reading it. It took me a couple of days of grieving. Honestly, it hits really deep when you really see it and you believe it. It hurts. It hurts. But I think it's really beautiful how you said that the spirit of it has been there forever. It's not like that, it's just that they co-opted it and twisted it a bit to use it for their benefit, right?
Yes, exactly, and they have to, because you can't really get rid of those scriptures. You can't do that. They're going to turn up. All right.
Well, it took a long time. And I was also thinking about what was Napoleon after when he went to Egypt, because he suddenly was on the outs with the Pope. They had killed the monarchy, and so what? It's so obvious. Napoleon, people know this. Mm-hmm. People know this secret, and so. But I think the Flavius, the historian, Josephus, that the second author brings up, that sort of about the. I think that really puts a nail in it for me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
About the history with the Jews?
Well, Carota and his thesis, his work is based on, the 40 years prior to this calendar being enacted, which goes back to his son Augustus. And Augustus was the god who brought the god of Rome who brought the 40 years of peace to Rome. Mm-hmm. It was the golden age. So he was like King David and Solomon bringing 40 years of peace. The same story. Solomon it's all the same story, right? So, but Atwell, what happened was there was 70 years of this Julian line, and then the Flavians decided that they would, Vitellius was the last of, there were 7 Caesars, I guess, and Vitellius, so Vespasian killed Vitellius, and that's when things changed, and they say, I think it was, you mentioned Virgil, who was the other great writer? Around that time, he wrote that the streets of Rome flowed with blood because the Flavians destroyed everyone who was killed, everyone who was...
So we were saying the streets of Rome were filled with blood, that the author had wrote that because they killed all the Julians, the Flavians.
Yes, yes. So then what they had to do now was they had to try and destroy this, such a sacred stance that people had in Rome for this hero Julius. So now Vespasian had to take that, you see, and supposedly it's written that he even resurrected someone from dead to back to life. He was actually
a magician, or
making miracles, and so people actually really did deify him and his son Titus, the Son of God. So they made this mythology come to the earth, you see, because the common people, they're always looking for that. This is why Augustine of Hippo wrote that Neoplatonism will not survive because it doesn't have the dying hero. It makes you the hero, and people don't want to be that. They want Jesus. Mm-hmm. There he is. There. We're going to follow him. You know, we need a model. We need someone to follow. You see, people don't want to take that responsibility onto themselves somehow. They're afraid of that. And so that's what Neoplatonism was. It was the only rival that corporate Christianity had.
Right.
Because it was the true Western spiritual school where they taught theurgy, henosis, astrology, vegetarian lifestyle, etc. All the good things. The Neoplatonists like Porphyry and Iamblichus, that's what they were teaching. So Rome, eventually Justinian shut down the Neoplatonist academies in 527, and that was for convenience, so that they could sort of shut down the spiritual, theological school in the West, and then everything materialist began with Aristotle.
Right.
So, you know, they needed that to control people a lot more. But all of these guys, like Atwill, he shows how these people actually recreated all of this. And Julius Caesar actually recreated the Babylonian, the Hebrew mythologies, the Egyptian, Sumerian. They've all just been appropriated and they occupy those positions. So in other words, if you go to a temple or a cathedral in Rome and you read the history of it, they'll tell you, oh, this Christian temple was built on the ruins of a Mithraic older Persian temple, which was itself built on an older, even unknown, so they'll tell you that this beautiful cathedral there in Rome, all this beautiful building was built on the ruins of that, and the ruins of that, because that's all they're doing. It's all they're doing. It's timeless. There's no historical anything, really. Yes, the history's there, but it has no bearing on what's really going on. You see, Jesus, well, that's Zeus. Jesus, Jupiter Zeus. You see, the Romans called him Jupiter, and the Greeks called him Zeus. So eventually, Jesus. And the Christians themselves, they'll tell you, oh, this is not the way they used to call him. They used to call him Yeshua. Yeshua. Well, if that's not yes, who is the same yes as Jesus, it's just the Hebrew way of saying Jupiter Zeus. Yeshua. Because this planet is so benefic and so life-giving, being hot and moist, that all good things come from heat and moisture. It's the only planet of the 7 that is both hot and moist, the 2 positive humours. Saturn, on the other hand, is cold and dry.
Right.
Try growing your vegetables in cold and dry. No water, and it's cold. The seed will come up, and then it'll go, whoop, die. It's death. Saturn is the energy of death, the frequency of death. It's not bad. It's just, it has to be there.
Right.
So Jupiter Zeus always gets the good praise. You know, Jupiter in astrology is the greater benefic. Benefic. But in theology, he is the benefactor. Benefactor. Because he saves mankind. Benefic, benefactor. It's all the same thing. So when you understand how to do syncretism and how to go into every, cross your disciplines, right, for instance, with me, I like to play blues, I like to play flamenco, I like to play baroque, I like to play classical, and I play all of those. I like to speak Spanish, I like to speak Portuguese, I love speaking French, I love speaking Calabrian, my dialect. Is that going to hurt my English when I speak Spanish? I was down in Nicaragua last month, and all I was doing was speaking Spanish. Has it hurt my English?
No.
I've still got English, but I had the flavour of speaking Spanish. So this is what's going on. People are being, cookie cutter, stereotyped and put into a church. Now you're a Jehovah's Witness, right? So you're the only true Christian. All these other ones, Pentecostals, Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterian, all of them now, because you're a Jehovah's Witness, they're actually false Christians. They serve the devil, and they're gonna take you to hell. So what happens when you take the Baptists out and you put them over here, and then you put the Jehovah's Witnesses back in there, and you ask them, "Are you the true church, and are they going to hell?" They will tell you, "Yes, we are the true way. We're the only true Christians." All of these guys, they're gonna lead you to hell and everlasting damnation. So what you do now is, because he was already condemned before, you put him back in here, and you wipe them all out, because that's how much value they will have. They don't have any value at all. They're all just going to corporatise your thinking, bring you into their corporate structure, and you're going to have to go with their agenda. If their Jesus doesn't drink coffee, you can't have coffee. If their Jesus doesn't do anything on the Sabbath, you can't do anything on the Sabbath.
Right. I think the Josephus Flavius, though, they also talked about how when we found Nag Hammadi, like that there was, curiously, the only books that we do have from that time. Most of the astrology texts that we have now, we got back after the fall of Constantinople. We didn't have those. I don't know, did we have Firmicus Maternus that whole time, or,
Good point. I always ask myself that. Because I see things in all of those ancient astrologers which have been, I would say, added by some tampering. And most of the tampering happened around the 500 years ago when the Jesuits began in 1538.
Okay.
Before that, right, they tell you that there was a dark age. Well, it wasn't. It was the golden age. It was a golden age. See all those beautiful cathedrals and buildings, those Gothic that was supposedly built in the Dark Ages, right? How can that be? What happened was, I think the Jesuits came along, the power structure of the elite families, they set them up to destroy the Renaissance, what we call the Renaissance, a rebirth. It wasn't a rebirth, it was always there. It was just there. So what they did was that they just destroyed a golden age. I do believe that it was all beautiful and wonderful, and then everything was taken out of the public domain, and then the power structures made sure the Inquisition began, and that anyone who thought differently, that were heretical, right, not orthodox, heterodox, they were going to be persecuted.
Right, well, especially them, because these are the thinkers of the society and the ones who can figure out their secrets, because they burned the evidence. And it wasn't until we refound it that we're able to say, you know what, it's really interesting that the New Testament portrays a messianic savior that has one sort of psychological and theological bent. Turn the other cheek, give Caesar his due, all of this. And then the messianic figure that we find in the Nag Hammadi library that was actually the figure of the Jews was not like that at all. He was supposed to be the one that came to lead them against Rome. So what I see going on there was like those wars with the Jews. It's interesting. We only have the New Testament, and we have Flavius Josephus's history of the Jews. And it's interesting how they go along. And it's interesting how, because of it, they were able to make Jesus in the New Testament make predictions about history, because really they were writing it later. So these sorts of things. And it's interesting how, what books do we have? Well, we have these two, and they go together, So this guy, Flavius Josephus, was a noble, a Jewish noble, and he was educated by the rabbis, the Essenes. Like, he had all of the knowledge of how the Old Testament was put together so that he could write this New Testament. Like, help couch it, right? And so we know they did that with the Aeneid, because it's not beyond it's like the trail's so clear. And so, it seems like that when we found the Nag Hammadi and we see who Jesus really was and how he's not really the same guy, that you start realizing that they did this in order to control the population. I mean, Rome was fabulously successful. And when they conquered a state, you became Christian or you died, period. And so this is how they had control. And I think you make a great point, though, about the tower and how it's actually really true, actually is my religion. And that they had some good points. They didn't ruin everything, entirely. Like, so, some of the wisdom is actually really beautiful. And I think that they were looking to Plato's Republic, like, Plato's writing about this. How do we control a society and govern them, But they twisted it for their own sort of criminal aims,
Yes, they did.
And the competing religion was always Neoplatonism, was always the astrological, thing, and that it was really hard to stamp out of the nobility, the people who were smart and educated in Rome. And that was after Constantine. Then they actually started burning the Platonic sources as well and stamped it out. And that we didn't get back until after the fall of Constantinople and the Medici's, Ficino translated it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So Rome doesn't always represent that evil of empire that the Jews and the heretics and the pagans were fighting against. No, Rome actually was the saviour of mankind. There was literature, there was culture, there was truth, there was Neoplatonism, there was acceptance of all religions. You could worship Isis there, you could Semiramis all over Rome. It was free. It was a free place. It was a place for anyone to go, like you would go now to, say, what's another place where you can mixing pots, sort of a London or a New York, where you go and have all flavours and all things, and you wouldn't be judged, etc., for who you are. And that's what Rome stood for. It's only when the political elements and the business elements come together and conspire, and that they use the vehicle of Rome to, channel their agendas through that vehicle. But it doesn't make Rome. We shouldn't just think of Rome and stigmatise it with a paintbrush and just it's all evil. No, it's not like that at all. We make a great mistake when when we don't penetrate and we have a limited view of anything.
I think that's, yeah, definitely true. And you can imagine some of the problems. Like, they were a civilizing influence. There were barbarians. I watched, like, Norse things, and people were just killing each other all the time. Like, you know, it was like a civilizing influence. So that was interesting. But then, yeah, so, I mean, they just, so that was like a benefit of kind of like their organizing society was kind of like a civilizing influence for the outliers, or the people that weren't, like, learning enough to be Neoplatonists, right? Like,
it's like America now. You know, a lot of people, when you talk about America, well, they condemn it. You know, all the military wars that they're conducting, and some of the negative things that this beautiful nation is known for. But that's not America. I mean, this is America.
Right.
You're American, right? And this is what Americans are: good people, friendly, freedom-loving. Everywhere you go, you see beautiful cities, such a rich place. It's so exquisite. It has so much to offer. So which America are we talking about? You know, is it the political? Because if you're going to look at political America, well, well, it's a mess.
Right.
But that doesn't define America. It doesn't define America. It doesn't get to do that. Sorry, you know, no matter how much you think of America in it's just that political window, that's a very limited view. Before I came to America in August, a lot of my truther friends would say, "Oh, don't go there. It's, you know, it's going to crash, and you know, you don't want to go to California. There's an earthquake's going to happen, and you know, the New World Order is really strong there, and it's a military, you know, dictatorship. It's a police state." No, I don't see any of that. I haven't seen any of that at all. You know, I was told that it's, you know, there's homeless people everywhere. It's going to pieces. I don't see that. I've seen a handful of homeless people here and there, but it's the same as anywhere in the world. You know, and so what are you looking for? You know, are you looking for something specific? Because if you are, you will find it. You know?
Right.
You can't just throw away the baby with the bathwater. And so it's the same with Rome. Political Rome had its agenda, and it's tainted what Rome really stands for.
Okay, and so you were saying that Rome, there are two different kinds of Rome. It just depends what you're looking for, right? I was thinking that too, that another potential problem that the Romans were dealing with, or you know, any ruler at that time trying to rule society, was that even the priests and the diviners and the astrologers were corrupt. You know, so they had like all, like, it was, how do I get in control of all these people doing like predictions in the street and this and that? And that's one argument that this Nicholas Campion, who does this history of Western astrology, makes. And he's like saying that it's not that the Romans were against astrology or like they used it all the time, but they wanted control of it because it was getting a little, you know, it was getting abused, you know, so I can see where that would have been a problem, and to kind of see, you know, synthesize, this is what the knowledge is, right, and this is the enlightened way we're going to go. It's sort of, it makes sense. I wouldn't have been my choice. I would have probably, you know, I may not have done it. I don't know, I feel like that, but
same in every field. Look at medicine. When the Rockefellers started their allopathy campaign to, you know, belittle and marginalise naturopathy and herbal ways of treating, because they wanted to patent all of their herbs and medications so they could make money. The same thing carries to this day. You know, you'll see people that will poo-poo you if you take cell salts, for instance. Oh, how can that help you? You know, a tissue salt. You know, homeopathic remedies, they're just, you know, they're not going to work. And so there's the same is with astrology, because astrology is such an expanding science. It expands your mind, and it helps you to understand much more than you would without it. So what will happen, like you said, it's going to be persecuted, right? They want to control it. Rome wants to control it. So it's like you see all of these homeopathic guys getting knocked off all around the world, you know, people who are going against the agenda of, say, for instance, just willy-nilly vaccinating all your children. You know, if a doctor goes against that and tries to teach, you know, other ways of immunising your body and protecting yourself against all of these diseases rather than having an injection with all sorts of unknown things in it, they will get a phone call, and it'll start from phone calls, and it'll start from, you know, less funding, and then they will start to blacklist you and things like that, rubbish you, until, you know, someone comes along and puts a bullet in your head, which we've seen a lot of this going on. Dr. Sebi, for instance, that's a good example. And guys who have to practice over the border, because here the FDA, is that it?
FDA.
They will come and visit you and see that's how the control happens. It happens on many, many levels, even to the point.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it happens in academia, because as a theology student, I was asking the wrong questions. You know, they identified me immediately as one who was thinking, and was thinking about the wrong stuff, and was potentially dangerous because I was really smart and uncovering stuff, you know, that they didn't like. So was I going to get a scholarship to go on to my theology thing, like, and get the, like, tenure? Never. Never, because I was asking the wrong questions, and it was really obvious that, you know, that I was headed in a direction that they were not going to help me go anywhere with that. So, yeah. I mean, I think to bring it back around to astrology is a great way to kind of wrap up and kind of end this presentation, but kind of saying that, you know, we see, though, that, like, you know, Rome and all of the different leaders of society have, you know, that they're, the way that they assume that they're the leaders, and that the reason that we give them that position has been assumed by shady pretenses and, like, not really, you know, by coercion in these things. And if these guys aren't the real rulers of the world, and aren't who we should be getting our you know, leadership from, then who is? You know, like, where do we get that? And I think the answer is the heavens and the astrology and the sky, in the way that, you know, kings used to rule before, by reading the stars and having proficient, really devoted astrologers and priests. You know, because you really see that the religion all along was star lore.
Yeah, of course. That's why you still have today pastors, moon, star, Astor, star, you see, from the stars. So you go to a pastor, what should he be teaching you? Well, he should be teaching you about the divine. So he should be a diviner. You know, he should be teaching you about the source. So he should be a sorcerer. I want to be a sorcerer. He should be teaching you about mystic. This is the same word as fire. MIST is water.
Oh, okay.
So this equals water. This equals fire. You see. So have you ever been heard where people will use the word mystical as something like delusional? Oh, that's mystical.
Oh,
what are you talking about, Santos? That sounds very mystical. You see how they poo-poo what is the finest. The finest, mystical is the highest level of understanding that a human can ever reach. That's why you become a mystic. You see, they don't like that. You know, a mystic is like some crazy guy now, you know. And yet, you talk about the baptism of water, and then in the scripture, it always refers to the baptism of fire as the highest one. John the Baptist said, "No, I baptize you only with water." It's a very lower level baptism. The one coming will baptize with spirit and fire.
Right.
Because, and as in the book of Acts, where there were 120 baptized with fire, and they had tongues of fire, they were mystics.
Mm.
So we are mystics.
Mm-hmm.
How can we say that? Well, we don't have these long beards and sit in a cave and just, do all sorts of weird behaviour like they paint a mystic, but we are mystics because we are not prioritising our material existence. I'm not chasing cars, careers, tennis courts, helicopters, swimming pools, apartments, and none of that. Never have, and I never will. Doesn't interest me. What does interest me is knowledge, understanding, wisdom. That's a mystic. So we are baptizing ourselves with mystical wisdom. And yet, all of these words, they point to the stars. Everyone is a star. We always say that, oh, we're stardust, but no one stops to think. We have children, we call them young stars. Yes, youngster. Sisters, spinsters, masters, monsters, fraudsters, gangsters, cheatsters, rock stars, superstars, ministers, pastors. Everyone's a star. Eventually, someone will come into one of those categories. And so, so it's already there in the language. It's already there in our thinking. We can see that. We give children gold stars when they, gold, silver star, bronze star, but we always like to speak about the stars in a very, very noble and dignified way. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. And this is in reference to our true nature, that we come from the stars. It's so hard for people to conceptualize this because we're in the gross world, and the gross world does not enable transcendental mystical thinking. It kind of just enables a linear way of thinking, the left brain. Everything has to be linear, has to fit on a line. It can't be lateral. It can't be non-linear, which is what we're doing.
Right.
We're trying to stop that process of conventional thinking, which is going to railroad our mind, into just the usual way. No, we're going to take a tangent. We're going to, instead of staying to that trusted, well-trodden path, we might just go down that way a little bit where there's no one's walked before. And you might find a pot of gold there. And that's what happens usually when you uncover all the stones. When I was a Jehovah's Witness, I began my path as a witness in 1981. I was still a teenager. 19 when I started coming back into my theological way, which I grew up with. In my teenage years, I tried to leave it behind, but I couldn't. I came back to spirituality. And I remember not being the conventional kind of guy. I still went ahead and studied books which I was not supposed to in secret. So I kept those books at home, and I did not share that with the conventional Jehovah's Witnesses that I was associating with. And I'm glad I did, because I found certain treasures, and I found a different way of thinking, which was more inclusive rather than exclusive. I didn't really buy into the teaching that only Jehovah's Witnesses were going to be saved. If you don't be a Jehovah's Witness, I did teach that because it was, the party line. So you do that when you work for a company. You don't, if you're working for Burger King, you don't go saying, oh, there's McDonald's around the corner, you can go there for a good burger. You're going to say that, hey, we got the best burgers, buy one here and now, and don't go anywhere else, right? So even though
when in Rome,
Yeah.
Do as the Romans.
Do as the Romans do.
Yeah.
So that's what we've known each other for years now. So that's what we are doing, aren't we? Being inclusive and trying to help people to see where there's more similarity than difference.
Definitely.
In everything.
Mm-hmm. And to try to recover some of our spiritual heritage that has been robbed from us, because we've been, told that it's not in astrology, that it's not in the stars, that, it's sort of had our heritage robbed from us. And then we go looking for it in Tibetan culture and yogic culture, and Americans are like notorious, and we'll take on any guru because we're just like, somebody help me. Because we've lost our spiritual heritage. And so in the West, we've really been working to uncover it from when it was taken from us. And I don't want to be, just be like, oh, it was the Romans, but I do see that being the place where everything fell off the map for a long time. And so that was our spiritual heritage. And not all of us were children. So some of, the Romans assumed that I was a child and that I needed to have a story told to me, that I wasn't going to be able to, put it together myself. Or maybe they just left it to those who would figure, milk for babies, meat for men. So we find it out. But yet at the same time, I just feel strongly as a student of religious studies that I want people to know that they don't have to go to Tibet. They don't have to go to yoga. They don't have to go anywhere. That really what we need to do, people do it. Everyone's offering is beautiful. I'm not saying that. But it is here in our own culture. Here's where it is. It's Neoplatonism, and it's Orphism, and it's the reading of the stars and the harmony of the spheres and the music. And there is a meditation and a practical aspect to all of it. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what syncretism's doing, and let's hope it continues to and prevails over the more limited, stereotypical way of doing things, which it only hurts people. The more you know, the more free you are. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So that's what syncretism endeavours to do. It endeavours to enable people to unlimit their minds. Why not understand, if you're a biblical individual, which I am, why not understand what Bhagavad Gita has to say and compare it, do comparative studies? For instance, why would you just limit yourself to English language? I can't do that. I want to be multilingual. I want to be a polyglot. And the same with music. I don't want to just play blues. I love blues. I can sit there and play blues all day long. I never have to change genre. I can just do that and I'll get enough out of it. But I choose to play Baroque and classical because I want all the flavours. I want as much as I can in my life, So...
yeah, that's a beautiful point. So still do yoga, still do this and still do that, but recognize that it's also here. I just feel like we're just starving. Western people and spirituality are just starving. And it's because those things have been hidden from us. So we're like children in a lot of ways. Not really, but in that respect, just kind of trying to understand, so.
We are.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But ultimately, astrology, and star study, star lore, and the way that works, so.
For sure. And astrology, I've always said, is the word of God, because when you break down the word astrologos, that's what it breaks down to. And I've always maintained, as all the great astrologers have, that it is the mother of all sciences. It is the mother. And from it come all the other sciences, alchemy, theology. It comes from the eclectic. It comes from that very, very sacred space where everything originates on the eclectic. And so all of these people who are trying to be good in their field, eventually they'll all have to recognise that everything comes from the stars. And when you look at the word star, we have another word, start. And that's where we start. We start our journey from the beginning, the stars. That's where you start. So
And Alpha and Omega.
The Alpha and the Omega.
Where we end too. So
Beautiful.
yeah. On that note, do you feel? Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks,
for
guys.
doing the interview. Yeah. Love y'all. Bye.